You know that feeling you get watching the news that the world is just getting more chaotic, more divided, and maybe a little more dangerous? Well, it turns out that feeling is backed up by some serious data. But what's really going on here? Today, we're diving deep into the brand new 2025 Global Peace Index report to get a clear diagnosis of our world on edge. I want to start with just one number: 438%. Just let that sink in. According to this report, that's how much deaths from internal conflicts have skyrocketed in just the past 17 years. It's an absolutely staggering figure, and it cuts right to the heart of why our world feels so incredibly unstable right now. So, let's get into the diagnosis. The first question the report really tackles is the most fundamental one. Just how bad is this decline in global peace? Yeah, this isn't just some recent dip or a bad year. We're talking about a solid decade where the world has consistently become less peaceful year after year after year. The report looks at 163 countries, and get this, over that time, 100 of them have seen their peacefulness go down. This is a steady global trend. Now, this one reveals something absolutely critical. We're not all in the same boat. The report calls it a growing peace inequality, and you can see why. While the most peaceful nations have barely budged, the 25 least peaceful countries have just plummeted by over 12%. The big takeaway here is that the gap between the stable and the unstable parts of our world is getting wider, and it's getting wider fast. And this number, well, it just shows the staggering human cost behind those statistics. Over 122 million people are now forcibly displaced from their homes because of conflict. That figure has shot up by over 185% since this index even started. I mean, to put that into perspective, in 17 countries, more than 1 out of every 20 people is now a refugee or internally displaced. Just wow. But here's where things get a little strange. It's a paradox. Even as the world gets less peaceful overall, some things are actually getting better. The global homicide rate, for example, it's been consistently improving. People in a lot of places actually feel safer from day-to-day crime. The huge problem, though, is that while personal safety might be improving in some areas, the scale, the intensity, and the death toll of organized, large-scale wars are getting drastically, terrifyingly worse. So that leads to the obvious question, right? Why? Why is this all happening? To answer that, we really need to look at the engines driving this global decline in peace. The report breaks it down into 3 major phases in recent global relations. After the kind of stable, predictable division of the Cold War, we jumped into this era of rapid integration. That was from the 90s until about 2008, when global trade and cooperation were booming. But ever since the global financial crisis hit, we've been in a totally new phase: increasing fragmentation. And this shift is just profound. The basic ideas of global cooperation and free trade are being replaced. Now, the new buzzwords are things like strategic competition, trade wars, and friendshoring, which is basically where you only trade with countries you're geopolitically aligned with. Being economically intertwined is no longer seen as a strength. It's seen as a weakness, a vulnerability that your rivals can exploit. And you can see how this fragmentation is spilling over into actual conflict. Wars are becoming more internationalized. A staggering 78 countries are now engaged in conflicts outside their own territory. That's up from 59 back in 2008. This just pulls more and more actors into the mix and makes finding any kind of resolution incredibly difficult. It's not just about the big superpower competition either. The report points to another huge shift: the rise of these really influential middle powers, like Turkey, Brazil, Indonesia, and the UAE. We're moving towards a multipolar world, which just adds all these new layers of complexity as more and more nations start flexing their own influence on the global stage. And finally, there's the economic pressure cooker. Check this out. In developing countries, an average of 42 cents of every single dollar of government revenue is spent just paying off debt. This kind of crippling debt completely strangles their ability to provide basic services, which, as you can imagine, fuels instability and dramatically increases the risk of civil unrest and conflict. Okay, so we've got a world that's fragmenting, and it's under massive economic stress. But what happens when a conflict actually does break out? This next section looks at the mechanics of modern warfare and why conflicts today are becoming so impossible to solve and so incredibly deadly. This might be one of the most damning in the entire report. We are, simply put, not ending wars anymore. Back in the 1970s, nearly a quarter of conflicts ended with a peace deal. Today, that number has collapsed to just 4%. Instead, they just become these frozen conflicts, simmering away until they inevitably, violently erupt again. The report identifies what is basically a conflict tinderbox, a set of factors that can turn a simple dispute into a devastating all-out war. Things like 1, significant external support arming the fighters. 2, deep ethnic divisions that frame the conflict as an us versus them fight for survival. 3, the logistical power to keep a high-intensity war going. And 4, conflicts that start in cities, which pose a direct threat to the government and provoke a massive response. And look, this isn't just theory. You can see how these factors apply in the real world to the current high-risk conflict in South Sudan. The report shows that strong elements of ethnic exclusion, external support, and using the conflict for political gain are all there, making it a total powder keg. It's a practical tool for seeing where the next disaster could happen. So now we get to the great paradox of our time. As the world becomes more fragmented and dangerous, what do? We pour an absolutely unprecedented amount of money into militarization. Global military spending hit a record $2.7 trillion this year. Trillion. But here is the stark, brutal reality of our priorities. For every single dollar we spend on the military, we spend less than 1 cent on peacekeeping and peacebuilding. We are investing exponentially more in the tools of war than we are in the institutions of peace. It's just unbelievable. The data paints a deeply, deeply concerning picture. So what's the prognosis? I mean, is there any path forward? Let's take a look at what the report suggests. The key, according to this report, is investing in something called positive peace. Now, this isn't just the absence of violence. No, it's the proactive creation of the conditions for peace. Things like a well-functioning government, low levels of corruption, fair access to resources. It's the very foundation of a resilient society. But here is the massive warning bell. For the first time in over a decade, positive peace is also in decline. And we're not just talking about in conflict zones. The foundations are actually weakening even in historically stable places like North America and Europe. And if we don't invest here, a further deterioration in global peace is almost guaranteed. So what does that investment even look like? Well, the old models of diplomacy clearly aren't cutting it anymore. We need new, more dynamic approaches, like the ones championed by the Paris Peace Forum. This means bringing everyone to the table, not just governments, but corporations and civil society too, to not just talk, but to actually incubate new policies and support tangible, on-the-ground projects that build resilience from the bottom up. So, when you boil it all down, the takeaway is this. The data shows a world on a very dangerous trajectory, and it leaves all of us with a fundamental question. In an era of increasing division and competition, how do we collectively find the will and find the resources to build the foundations of positive peace before it's too late? That is the challenge this report poses to every single one of us.